Are you a scaling SaaS founder?
Ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those who don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Nevins.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where we tried putting rocks in our pockets to help keep us grounded. I'm your host, Jeff Nevins. I help B2B SaaS founders like you grow from traction to scale. Here, growth is more than just numbers. It's about crafting a future-proof company, premium valuation, and leaders who build a business of significance while living epic, adventurous lives. Here are my top 3 leadership lessons from riding out a tornado. Last Thursday night, the unexpected happened. A tornado ripped through town in my neighborhood. Damage wasn't really nearly as bad as it was, say, across the bridge or a few blocks over. Mostly here, trees down, patio furniture tossed a few hundred yards. It flattened the marina across the bridge, toppled buildings, peeled off roofs, snapped trees, and telephone poles like toothpicks. Unbelievable. Went into my neighbor's back porch, ended up in his front yard. It knocked down power lines all over. No power or internet for about 3.5 days. Kind of crazy weekend. But thankfully, no serious injuries here, no loss of life. Throughout the Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Kentucky, Kansas, I think 15 people this weekend. So that's really rough. Every experience in life, I'm constantly asking the question, what can I learn from this? And that's true whether it's good things that happen, which is a lot, and also things that aren't so great. So here are my top 3 lessons so far. The first thing that really stood out to me is the importance of staying calm under pressure. When everything around you is in turmoil, being able to keep a level head and make rational decisions can make all the difference in the world. In this case, there was no warning. We'll put a video up on the channel and you can actually see, literally no warning, 5 minutes from relatively calm to a little rain to unreal. No sirens. It just popped up super fast. Winds ripping 100 miles an hour one direction for a few minutes and then shifted completely opposite, ripping 100 miles an hour the opposite direction for I don't know, a while. Incredibly bizarre. In moments of chaos, stop, breathe, think, and act. I actually wrote about that in my book, Small Fish, Big Pond. But a really good lesson for leaders to remember because chaos can be the norm in business and entrepreneurship. The pivotal moment for me was when I had to make a split-second decision. Do I stay in the house or do I make a run to our steel frame workshop? Decision could literally be, life and limb kind of decision. And, it was that moment, I had new clarity on the weight of leadership and the impact that it can have on others. And, if you're curious, I did. I made the run to the workshop, and that was ridiculous in itself. But I thought that was better than the alternative. The second lesson was preparation and plan. We've talked about what to do. We've been out here, 5-6 years. We've talked about what to do and done some mental reps. What would we do if this happened? And we've got, stuff prepared, flashlights, weather radio, where to go, what to do. We have a plan. But in reality, some things went well with that plan and others didn't at all. And it worked out okay this time, but there was a lot of room for improvement. The flashlight worked. I couldn't find the weather radio. Communication with family members in town wasn't great at all. I could have done a lot better at that. But plans had to adapt to the reality on the ground. And like I said, some things went well and others didn't. And that really mirrors my business experience as well. The best strategic plans are, they're plans, right? And you could say, disaster recovery plan, sales plan, things never seem to go as planned, right? If you've been an entrepreneur for a while, you've probably experienced that. We have to be ready to adapt and make good decisions in the moment that are really aligned with our end goals. So we have to know what the outcome is we're looking for and then make decisions that move us closer to that when those plans we thought were going to get us there don't. The third was a little more emotional intelligence and empathy. It's one thing to see these events like on the news or, movies. I remember when Twister came out years ago. And you understand it mentally, what people are going through and just, what the experience is. But it is completely different to experience it and go through that yourself. It's the kind of thing that happens to other people, not me. That's, somebody else deals with that, not me, until it did. And it completely shifted my perspective. I have a friend whose family lost their house in a tornado a few years back, and we were talking about it and talking about just that perspective change. And he said something really I thought was profound, and it was, I wish nobody knew what that was like. Ignorance is bliss. And that's something that really stuck with me and I thought was right on point. I mean, ignorance really is bliss. And I wish nobody had to go through that, not here, not the other people in Texas and the other states around, Iowa, Oklahoma, Nebraska, lots of places this weekend, and 15 people didn't make it out of that. So it's, I wish nobody had to do that, but ignorance is bliss. I wish I hadn't gone through it and I did know what it was like. But now that I do, it's that difference in kind of head knowledge and heart knowledge, really experience versus just mental assent. Team members and employees go through tough things all the time, and fellow founders do too. It's one thing to be removed from it and hear about it on the outside looking in, and it's completely different to walk alongside, provide support, encouragement, and sometimes just sit in silence together. That's one of the things that we do within our community at Champion Leadership Group is not sit in silence together all the time, but it's founders who are experiencing all sorts of different things, good things, bad things, that we have all of these experiences, but we have somebody to share those with, and I think that's really cool and super helpful, especially in those tough times. You know that somebody else has been through it before. So I'll leave you with just a little challenge, and that is, take a moment, reflect on your own leadership skills. How can you apply these 3 little lessons to your own life? And I'm looking at that and looking for different ways to apply it to mine as well. How can you do that and also inspire those around you to raise their leadership game? Drop me some comments in the chat below. I can't wait to hear your thoughts, comments, maybe lessons. And remember, leadership isn't just about a title, it's about making a positive impact and guiding others toward success. So look for lessons in everyday life because they are all around us, even sometimes when we wish they weren't. Our expert last week was Michael Begg, co-founder of AMZ Advisors. He's helped clients drive over $500 million in online sales. We talked about how to go to market, how to successfully sell online, and leveraging the best e-commerce strategies to convert more SaaS subscribers. Our founder last week was Pascal Weinberger, co-founder and CEO of Bardeen.ai. We talked about scaling smart micro SaaS and using AI to solve big problems quickly. Pascal has built the company in a very smart way as well. Very cool. If you missed either of those episodes, go back and give them a listen. My guest today is Beth Nevins, founder of Developa.io. An experienced operator in the people and talent space, Beth specializes in recruitment and people operations design and has supported companies backed by top-tier VCs like Tiger Global, Balderton, and Atomico. Welcome someone who excels at shaping and steering dynamic teams in the startup ecosystem, Beth Nevins. Hey Beth, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Thanks for having me.
Well, tell me a little bit about your background and how Developa came into being.
Yeah, sure. My depth, if you think of me as like a T-shaped person, broad and deep, but my depth is in talent. So I started off outside of university straight away into a recruitment agency, but this recruitment agency had a difference because it specialized in the startup space. So I was working supporting co-founders and founders very early on as far as their talent strategy and sourcing goes. And eventually, having had some success there and met amazing people and candidate market, I went internal. So what that means then, I actually joined the startups directly as a talent leader, supporting them on their strategy and sourcing and attraction piece. And that opened my eyes to a wealth of context and nuance that you don't see on the outside. And that was an amazing experience. And through that talent journey, I organically then started broadening my skill set across the people stack and leadership development piece as well. So I ended up running people and talent teams then as an operator. And that led me, after years doing that in many different business models, now working as a portfolio consultant. And Developa has 3 core services, which is for the tech startup scene, from seed stage to Series C is the top end of the sweet spot. And there's three services. So one, which is more relative to early stages, is providing candidates, having had a lot of experience doing that. The second one then is the company evolves more in that build and scale stage, is supporting on people operations design and strategy around performance, which becomes very much a pressing subject when they're revenue generating. And the last one is then more of a newer development and still iterating, is more of a founder training program. And I call that centoring because it's a mix of coaching techniques, but actual more formal mentoring as well. And that supports a first time founders transition from Series A to Series B, where my job is to support leveling them up on some of the soft skills, but more importantly, on some of the more technical hard skills that they need around leading leaders and building their leadership team.
Yeah, that transition is a tough one, going from leading a
Yeah.
team to leading an organization and people. And there's a lot to learn there, hard skills and soft skills,
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly. And I think it's the first time they've got multiple stakeholders. Communication becomes very intentional, is required as you scale. Hiring a leadership team and people that may have more experience than you is also, an interesting psychological process and mindset
Yeah.
shift to go through. So there's a lot of coaching and mentoring around how you do that and how that benefits you, bringing that experience in. So yeah, there's lots of dimensions that we coach and we train through, and that program is always evolving and iterating through the feedback that I have with founders as we grow together.
So how do you approach recruitment differently for startups compared to established companies, or maybe, early stage versus Series C? What strategies have you found to be most effective?
Well, there's lots of things to think about in terms of the challenges. I think, of course, when you're seed and very early on, the biggest challenge you have is attraction, right? And
Mm,
the thing you're coaching at that time is anyone can stick an advert out and attract some candidates. That's an obvious option. But trying to
right.
coach then early stage founders on attracting the right talent is the key thing that you coach at the seed stage. So you're trying to, at that early stage, get them to really understand their business model and how the business actually creates value. And then working from understanding what capabilities and what candidate persona, what type of candidate then will be successful in this business, is a lot of that coaching exercise to get that founding team right at the seed stage. And likely, or more likely at that point, you are requiring more of a sourcing model. So you're actually going out to hunt that talent to get what we call an A player, which I say, and I subscribe to this, is the best talent we can find for the money that we've got in the
Yes.
market. And quite often early on, that's more likely to, as I said, require a referral or a sourcing approach. And what you're doing at that stage is, because you have more of a founder led recruitment approach, you're coaching the founders to become great recruiters themselves at that point, particularly when they're the key evaluator. Now, as you start growing, of course, you have a talent team. Um, and then the next stage of what you're trying to support them on the recruitment strategy then is, okay, you're talking a lot more around metrics. So maybe earlier on, cost per hire is not so important. It may become important KPI as you grow. So there's different sort of metrics you're looking at for success as you start scaling. You're looking at how that candidate persona actually scales. How does everyone get on the same page of codifying what it means to be successful here? You are systemizing more of that process and pushing that down into the leadership layer. So you're actually now training leaders to become great recruiters in the way that we want them to recruit, not just the founder anymore, because the founder may not be on all those interviews, or certainly not post maybe 50, 70 people anymore. There is a bit there they may not be available, particularly around a fundraise. So you have to look at how does that
Sure.
scale and standardize without mitigating the quality of what that seems to look like. So early on, founder led, to summarize, and teach them to the obvious core basic foundational techniques at a great level. Later on, you're looking at more of the systemization and the systems that can scale and push that down then into the leadership level as you grow, which is always fascinating to watch, because if you don't get that bit, you can have lots of leaders on different levels of standards of their interview
Yes.
technique. And I'll be very honest, I have a great story on this. I was brought in to do an audit on talent by a board and a COO, can't name names. But this is why it's very important when you build that talent team, because the talent team are then the filter. You only see what they bring in. It's absolutely imperative that you're teaching founders then on what great talent teams look like. because it then starts and stops at that team. And that team has a great level of responsibility and accountability, which is why I think that role should be elevated to a much higher status than startups and scale ups and even corporates actually typically hold it to, because it's fundamental to success. But at that stage, part of that audit, going back to the story, was, admittedly, there was some capability, issues where some of that talent team perhaps weren't in the right roles or the right, capability level for what was required. And what we actually looked at that scale up, which, it has some real challenges, is the talent strategy fundamentally was off. So they were hiring in the wrong companies to fit the stage and time. So there's a dimension called situational relevance. Now, what that means is, let's say we are a 250 to 500 headcount company, or we're just shy of 250 and going on that next phase of growth. You don't really want to hire then the 10,000 company person, because the situational relevance of the challenges and how they design is going to think very differently to someone who's probably closer to the headcount of where you're going trajectory wise. And there are risks with that. So there are benefits of having someone maybe a couple of stages ahead that has seen that scale and can give you those stories and lessons. But going 10x ahead already on that journey, those types of hires, it's almost as if you're over engineering the company. You don't need to think that far ahead yet. We don't have those problems yet. So it caused a load of pain in the audit when I was looking at some of the problems. For example, there was a right sizing exercise then we needed to look at, because some of these leaders from a 10K headcount company had just built these massive teams. So lean just is no longer a thing, just used to so many resources.
Yes.
Salary inflation was a massive problem, because we hadn't looked at again, hiring people from certain company sizes are more used to a particular reward package or value creation around equity, which doesn't exist in a big corporate, or it's very restructured, at least very differently on incentives. So we had a huge comp issue then in terms of how compensation was being influenced and structured by the leadership, because they were used to very different incentives. So that's some real challenges then that you have to start looking at, as I said, in terms of making sure you have the right talent team then, because they play such a critical role in education and strategy, and as I said, execution, and mitigating that risk as you scale is a big thing to look at when you're on the the hyper growth, or at least the scaling journey from BCD in particular.
That's so important. And I love that. Just the situational relevance. I think that's a really key term.
Mm.
And as it's all the time in startups, and they get a funding round, and then they want to go hire somebody from, that has done some great thing at this big notable startup.
Yeah.
And then they come in and they fail. And they're like, why not? They're so good over there. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that you just hit on it. It's that situational relevance.
Yeah, yeah. And I get it, because I think, we talk, this is a slightly different topic, but we talk about logo then as it goes into what you're saying. But
Yes.
look, when you're hiring someone early on, always one of the litmus tests you also have to think about is they attract great talent. And,
Yes.
sometimes there is some logo seduction, and sometimes there is, have they come from a reputable brand, and are they a thought leader? Of course, that has some weighting when you're thinking about that, as that's important, because what's the first thing sometimes we do when we're looking as a candidate? We'll go into LinkedIn and see who's working there, and we see if we,
Right.
so there is some truth and some weighting in that to look at. However, logo seduction and logo focus on its own, and not coupled with any due diligence, or as you and I just both rightly said, some of that situational relevance is finding the right logo within that situational relevance and within that
Yeah.
market sizing, and that market relevance is what you're looking for, rather than putting the later stage Googler into a 0 to 10 company. Is a very different, being the later stage Googler is very different to being the early person at Google. And I'm not saying Google is not a right logo. It's a great company. It's
Sure.
been at the forefront of culture for many years. But the types of candidates and hires in those companies now at Google is different to the earlier days. And that's something still to think about in terms of the stage and time of that logo is at as well.
Yeah. Very different. And a lot of times we'll see, just because you have a big logo and that company went on a rocket ride, it seems like a lot of times that rocket ride lands on people's resumes as they were there, but what really was their role? How do you determine,
Mm-hmm.
specifically what their role was, and what their contribution was to that
Yeah.
growth?
Amazing question. So I think so. This comes back to some of my hiring philosophy and performance philosophy. Know the conditions is one of my phrases in that, because conditions impact results. So, as you quite rightly mentioned, that's where the probing and exploring and open ended questions to compare and contrast is very important when you're talking to candidates to work out what the conditions were to their success. What constraints were they working with? Did they have loads of cash? Did they have loads of resources? Again, does that match your constraints, your conditions that they will be successful in? Some, as you said, even we talk about even like the wartime CEO may be different to a growth CEO as far as professional
Yes.
CEOs are concerned, right? Some have those strengths. And that's again working out, talking to the candidate. Part of that experience when you interview them is actually a self-reflection for them. Sometimes they go on a realization through those questions that this might not be for them. A very good candidate that with more experience, I find, does have a very strong self-awareness of their sweet spot and the conditions that work for them. And that's what part of that interview experience is about, is getting them to really gauge their self-awareness of where is best for them, rather than you managing their expectations and telling them what it looks like. If they want to sell, some of them will just say, yes, I understand those conditions. But actually, a compare and contrast method is much more useful, to ask them more open-ended questions and just to learn more about their experience that led to their success. Yeah.
So now the startup is designing effective people operations. What are some key considerations that they may overlook, and what is the impact those oversights have on their performance?
Yeah. So I think this is the age-old challenge of growing fast and commitments that sometimes have been made at a board or investor level,
Yeah.
and we have to meet them. And the thing about business is two things. A business is there to make money. That's the first thing. But the second thing then is, business decisions is about trade-offs and understanding and getting everyone around on the same page around what trade-offs we're making. What we appreciate, we're not going to be very good at this, and this is a problem, and this is going to be a fire that we're going to burn, and these are the priorities of what we're actually optimizing for consequently. I think the challenge that people operations always faces is this age-old challenge of consolidating and building versus firefighting and looking after when you're very
Yeah.
lean, other issues that come with it. And this is the age-old challenge that when you're scaling and hiring fast, and I don't want to conflate those terms, because scaling and growing headcount is two different things. So let's just keep to growing headcount. If you're growing headcount very fast, the challenge that you have with that, if managers aren't trained and you decide then to optimize for low process and high collaboration, you need training. If you're not having the training and having experienced managers, then that's when you need to focus on higher process in your people operations design, where the HR team are taking more of an active role, building more process flows and systems to support more junior managers, or, as I said, growing at the rate that you are, people become more perhaps intuitive by reading documents, more self-service to manage themselves, rather than the higher collaboration, lower process strategy. So it really depends. But as I said, the challenge is always building as fast as you can as the rate that you're growing on, and learning at that same rate as well. Because if you can't do that, what tends to happen, as I said, without training or strong systems and process, you do end up with a fair amount of what's called employee relations issues. Employees
Yeah.
will start arguing with managers. And the challenge then, where you end up in that cycle of burn for the people ops team, is that employee relations issues are very time consuming. So the best way to support high performance as a people operations team, where possible, is to prevent underperformance or conduct and so forth on those issues in the first place. And it's very hard. So the thing that people operations, I like to say, really key, the first thing we need to do above process is actually philosophies. And that's where a really strong people leader needs to lead with that first, is actually, let's codify and define what good looks like here on all those levels of hiring, leadership, values, performance first. Because at least if you can then lead with that and define that at the company level, that will solve a lot of your issues and support that scaling, if you can at least lead with philosophies and then play catch at them as some of the systems and the frameworks that will actually reinforce and support that.
Yeah. So as companies are scaling up, and especially funding, they're doing it pretty rapidly, and we've seen hyper growth over the last 5 to 10 years in a lot of companies. How do they maintain that strong company culture and keep that intact as they're going?
Yeah, I think that in the early days, this is where the role of the founder plays such a key role, right, in culture. And it mustn't be delegated to people teams as a sole
Mm,
unit that is, yes, the VP or the CPO is the cultural custodian and needs to be strong, high integrity of role model in that. But ultimately, very early on, people look to the founder. So the key thing in the early days is the founder understanding their role in that picture and that their role in terms of leading culture, in terms of understanding their own behavior and how their own behavior and role model impacts the culture. So that's the first center of the universe you need to focus a founder on in founder-led companies and their role in culture. And then again, with culture scaling, for me, it's always a top-down approach. You look to the next layer down or around that founder, which is the C-suite or what we call the the leadership team, whatever you want to call us,
sure.
and really making sure that dynamic is healthy and how that team makes decisions, how they work will filter down in terms of the rest of the company. And you can absolutely see it, and I've been there before, where two departments are not working very well together, and you can get two of those C suites or C level positions in a room, and you can see ultimately that is exactly why those two entire units aren't working together, is because those two have not aligned fundamentally or agreed on the direction of the company or what they both believe in is important. So that alignment piece, again, top down, needs to be done. There are also very much different inflection points that impact culture as you grow.
Yeah.
And part of hiring experienced leaders is to already prepare the company in the communication of what's going to come next. So there is arguably a playbook that happens at different inflection points between a C to an A to B. And part of taking the employees and the whole company on that journey is actually, before it happens, prepare them for what's about to happen. After we do the fundraise, it's likely some of these changes will happen. After we do the fundraise, these things become more important to us. After we do the fundraise, see these are some of the impacts that we have to foresee, and just get ready in our mindset as a team, as a company. There will be a mindset shift required across the whole company at these different inflection points. And the whole point of culture is to ideally take people on that journey before things happen to them and it's a surprise, because for people who've been in startups long enough, or we'll see that actually these things are quite common. But part of my role as a people leader is to actually tell people what to expect. You can't always predict all the changes and all the crises that go along with that, but actually there is some rules that are repeatable between the stages.
Yes, yes. And how do you take people on that journey with the mindset shift? I mean, does everybody make that shift, or are there people that get stuck and
Yeah.
don't? And then how do you handle that?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, right? Is I think everybody has a sort of a sweet spot of which they're probably most suited to as far as their environment's concerned, and ways of working which evolve over time. And I think while values are important and your core capabilities, the ways of working actually has a big impact of how we do things, is also a big part of culture, which is why culture does evolve. But yeah, there are always people that struggle at different points. I think one of the biggest transitions personally that I see is the C to Series A. I think that's the biggest step change in behavior of, as I said, like super low process, high collaboration. We're all in the same room. We have more of an oral tradition of how people understand things by just talking and explaining things. And Bob knows Jill and Jill knows Pratika, and how we all work. But actually, once you get to the Series A and beyond, we have to start codifying that. We're now having teams and different functions as opposed to just one clump of people together as one team. So there is a big shift then in terms of adding, as I said, philosophy is more process, a bit more standardization, systems thinking, pushing more accountability down, not just the founder is now the firefighter or
Yeah.
the escalation point for all issues. The founder now has to work, on the company, not just those individuals that are around them at the table in the beginning. So again, it's preparing people for all of that shift, and not everybody likes that. So that's why I always find like the founding team sometimes struggles with that transition. I think if you're naturally then in a post product market fit hire, so a sort of late A perhaps onwards, I tend to find A, B, and C as you keep growing tends to transition quite well beyond that point in terms of keep scaling with the business and being a bit more a lot more data informed, and then later on moving into more analytics and so forth and centers of excellence. But yeah, the biggest transition I tend to find is C to A.
Ready to future-proof your company and scale to new heights? Dive into the ultimate resource designed for SaaS founders and C-suite executives. Champion Leadership Group gives you an unfair advantage in scaling up revenue and outwitting competitors. Imagine solving your biggest scaling headaches and hitting 5, 10, 20 million ARR and beyond with ease. We take away the guesswork and the grunt work, and we replace it with framework, supporting you with our on-demand fractional C-suite team, exited founders, and a powerful operating system built into software, plus that thriving community of fellow scaling SaaS founders. That's how we make it happen. If you're stuck at your current revenue level, this is your ticket out. Feel like your company is the world's best kept secret? We amplify your success to the world. Already crushing it, but know there's another gear? Let's shift into that together. And if you're too busy to breathe, we got you there as well. We'll free up 20% of your time in the first month. Now is the time to upgrade from traction to scale. If you're ready to work smarter, not just grind harder, schedule a 10-minute growth brainstorm. It's free, and we'll pinpoint the number one thing blocking revenue. Visit championleadership.com, where leaders evolve and companies transform. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So
Or
I
arguably,
was thinking about some. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say arguably seed through to the B, because it's going through that Series A. The transition, as I mentioned, with the founder is usually the biggest transition up, leveling up that you're doing with them. It's the big shock to the system on that journey.
That is really big. Going from a very small team to you get to Series B. I mean, there's a lot of growth that happens in there.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about something along those stages of growth, and something that I've observed, and we'll throw it out there and get your take on it. And when it comes to people and hiring, I think that companies have incentivized the wrong things a lot of times. And what I mean by that is just in the hiring process, you ask a manager or even a CEO about what they do or their business. And one of the first things they say is team size. And even within companies, the bigger your team, the more important you are, the more influence you have. And so there's this big incentive to hire people. Then over the last couple of years, you can look at layoffs at FYI, and we can see, just this giant shedding of talent in tech.
Mm-hmm.
500,000 people laid off, and it's what were all those people doing? And just all this over hiring, partially because they had funding. What is your take on that? Do you think we are incentivizing the wrong things, or maybe there's something else going on there?
There's multiple reasons. I don't think you can pin it down to one reason or one individual. I think there's many factors. I think, and again, I wouldn't necessarily put a particular weighting on any of these, so I don't want to offend anybody. But I think, even at the sort of, and I've been on enough board meetings to see this, but even at certain levels on the the VC side, and again, venture is about growth, it's different to PE, but even in some of those meetings and the metrics set and so forth, a lot of it, the success was historically correlated to the headcount growth. And that then also led, from a talent attraction piece, well, if the headcount's growing, then it must be doing something, something really well. And when I used to get headhunted for jobs, the big question always was around, what headcount growth have you done rather than impact? And I think there's the complete opposite.
Exactly.
Complete opposite.
You're incentivized for being inefficient. More people.
It's the complete opposite of understanding your burn multiples against your ARR and your,
Yes.
on the route to profitability. And and I learned this so late in my career because of all these factors I then had this massive epiphany. I was like, wow, actually, if we can do more with less in a sustainable way, we are a high performing business. And that's where impact and defining impact became so important very early on. And I think, look, it's systemic. If you think about a lack of investment, I'll be very honest, in terms of valuing the talent function, it comes in way too late, in my opinion, and investing in those roles as well. So you don't always have the support system of what an intentional talent strategy and the considerations need to look like, as I mentioned. Often if you're using agencies early on, no disrespect to agencies, but their role is to take a requirement and fill it as they're asked to. That's nothing wrong
Right.
with that. The strategy comes from within at your business, and it's down to us to be accountable as an internal team to get that bit right. And this is where, without intentional strategy and understanding what success looks like for our company at a fundamental level, as I said, headcount versus output versus good outcome, then you end up with this unfortunate, not just downsizing, but often more common than that is right sizing that happens then at the series A to B. And it may not even be, as I said, that we need less people, although that often happens. It's actually the wrong roles are in the wrong level. So we're not even getting the performance required to meet the outcomes that we want. And that often happens, as I quite rightly said, in this audit I'd recently done. That was the real issue. It was less about the number of headcount. It's just where all those roles and headcount sat was just, incorrect, basically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What is your take on just the layoffs that have happened? And how is it that somebody can lay off, 30, 40, 50, 80% of a company and have no measurable impact to the business? Or maybe it's just a hidden impact that we don't see.
So let me just qualify if I understand that correctly. You're saying, how can someone get to a point where they've laid off 30% and it hasn't impacted the business? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes.
I think it comes down, as I said, the root cause is defining what impact actually means. And I think if you're a first time founder, it comes back to, again, the business model. And this is where I think values, I've got a strange theory on values, and people might not like this, but I think values is a strange thing, because if you think of just classical strategy of looking at, you even have to read the Harvard Business Review to work this out. But if you go back to this cascade scale of how we come up with a strategy, it's what is the business? So are we a manufacturing business, or are we a care business, or whatever? And what are the key capabilities we need to support and enable that business success? Now, I don't just mean we need technical resources. Yes, that's a part of the wider capability strategy. But what I mean by that is, look, if you're a manufacturing business in the world, the customers care about OTIF, which means on time in full, and these other dimensions. If that is what the customers care about, the capabilities we need and the values that need to align to that have to be around those things, around reliability.
So good.
Efficiency and so forth. Where care industry and that business model, the customers may care about very different things, which means the capabilities we need and the values are needed are different. Now, as I said, this comes down to a problem is when the founders, and no disrespect to them, are going on that journey, which takes time to understand deeply what that business model and what those capabilities actually mean. And that takes some time, to be honest. And even I've not seen sometimes boards, wrap their heads around that business model. And that's why your board makeup needs to have a good thought out strategy. And then what happens then is, because there's that disconnect fundamentally to understanding how the company creates value and how that gets internalized, is you end up then having values which are from the founder, which is great. It can be, care about the mission and, I don't know, radical candor and all these things. But actually, because they haven't understood the capability bit, the values don't really drive performance. The values don't really connect, really, in terms of what are the things we need to do in the right way that leads to the right outcomes for value creation in that market space that we're operating in. And I think this is the challenge, because you can have great values, but if they do not marry up to the capabilities that the company's being measured on in the market and what the market expects, the customer expects, you have a real issue there. And that's where impact fails often in terms of getting more out of less. And we are filling a leaky bucket by not really focusing on performance definition and just then thinking that adding more people is the solution, rather than doing the real hard work. And maybe that is a capability thing of not understanding what our business is in terms of value and performance that ties into that.
That's so good. And it's easy. That's the easy solution, is to just throw people at a problem instead of really deeply understanding the problem and figuring out what the capabilities are we need to go solve that problem, and that alignment.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I've been there. And no, it's not HR, the people team's fault either when they lead with values. They are doing their job. but they're working in isolation. And it's a whole systemic thing that the whole company needs to wrapping their heads around, is what this business actually is. It's particularly if you're disrupting a sector, that's, particularly hard, particularly if the sector is pretty archaic, which is why you're disrupting it in the first place. Understanding how that sector works deeply does take a while. And I've been through that journey myself. So it's, I can't really say it's anyone's fault, but it is the reason why some of this perfect storm, often happens for startups.
Sure. Yeah, and it becomes self-perpetuating because the requirements come, and the recruiting is doing their thing, and everybody is doing what they think they're supposed to be doing. And a lot of times
Yeah.
it is what they're supposed to be doing, but it's
Yeah.
that the request
Yeah.
that kind of kicks the whole thing off, that maybe is a little misguided.
Yeah. And I think it's very important as to the employee market, to be very frank. This is so systemic and massive in terms of disruption and the ambition and the risk that you take with the high reward. There's also an
Mm,
element, to be honest, also that as an employee, you need to understand that. You need to understand what you're getting yourself into. Layoffs and right sizing and all of that, it is a highly likelihood scenario. No matter how perfect science we try to make this and understand the business and learn about the market as we go, that is, and something that we all have to come to terms with as an employee, is the risk that things might happen. And even as you said earlier around, how fast we can scale up with the business success and rate of growth is also not going to happen for everybody as well. And I think that's the whole point of,
sure.
everyone involved in a company, in a startup, needs to understand there is high risk. But if it all works out on all dimensions, there's high reward for everybody. And I think that's the important part of understanding as an employee is, yes, plan for that. Make sure your whole life and your home setup is prepared and it can allow for that risk. Because, everyone should even know when you go into a startup that 90+% fail. And,
Right.
so layoffs is, a tiny scenario in the grand scheme of things, of whether the whole company could go down with the ship, right? So I think there's also that element to just be, have that perspective as well. I think it's important as an employee going into this, that it's not, the company's job is to set the right strategies ideally, but in a very, not a saturated market or an archaic market, or a market where you're trying to disrupt, there are a huge wealth of problems that we're solving and going to encounter that we won't be able to know in advance. We do not have a crystal ball. And we need to accept that some of those things that come with that is how we structure teams and how we look at those capabilities, because that is a learn as we go approach sometimes. Yes, don't get me wrong, if you're 100% over capacity on your headcount, I think there is a real problem there. And that comes with being given too much money, to be honest. Quite frankly, that's it. And yeah, that's all I have to say on that point. What's your thoughts
Well,
on
I
it?
think that's
What's your thoughts?
I think it's really smart to think about that, and it's a conversation that I think a lot of candidates don't think about when it comes to
Yeah,
going to work for a startup. Is the likelihood is this is
yeah.
not going to work, and just
Well,
statistically,
you want to have ever the optimist, right? Sorry, my child
yes,
just went.
yes,
Ever the optimist. You want to go in with that positive outlook, and I believe the impossible is impossible. Otherwise, I wouldn't join in the first place. But
exactly.
but going into startups and working in startups is about, as I said, first trade-offs and the second calculated risk. It is a high chance that this may not work out, but you have to be mad enough to still go into it.
That is the entrepreneurial life, is that
Yeah,
we know that the odds are against us, and we do it anyway.
exactly that. Yeah,
Yeah, it is that it's that mindset. And I think you talked
yeah,
about that earlier. It's just having that mindset. And it's true going in, and it's true as the company continues to grow and scale, it has to evolve. But it is that mindset
yeah.
of, I believe this is going to work. I'm completely committed. But the reality is making sure that you understand that risk,
Yeah,
and going into it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As we talked about soft skills at the very beginning that you're helping leaders develop, what are some key soft skills that you see that every leader has to have that makes them extremely effective?
hmm The number one is empathy. So I think whether that's a soft skill, I'd probably say, yeah, I'd probably argue it's a soft skill, a human skill rather, is empathy. And, I think founders are really good with empathizing with the customer. I think that's why we build great products. I think that's great. That also needs to be reflected on that side. That said, the irony when you're building startups and the role that the people leader can really have value and play that no one sees, it's always behind the scenes, is also taking the employees on the journey to have empathy for the founder. And
Mm.
it's that bridging role that's equally important in terms of healthy relationships on both sides, because the founder is not the fountain on all knowledge and has all the answers, as I said, particularly if they're first time founder, and we are doing the impossible. So we are going to get things wrong at the founder, at the company level. If we're making this amount of decisions every day, it's going to happen. And there's a huge amount of pressure on a founder. And the people role plays that real interesting dance between knowing when to, sit down with the founder quietly in the corner and get them to reflect on the impact that they will have on the people around them with their behaviors and some of the decisions that they make. And again, it's calculated risk, but also, empathizing in the interpersonal relationships that they have with their leadership team to get the best out of them performance wise and raising that EQ. But also, as I said, at the same time, is that we also have sometimes the coaching conversations with the employees in the corner around getting them to understand, is now a good time to raise this to a founder? He's in the middle of a fundraise. Can, empathize with that. Of course, if it's definitely on compliance or anything that's, breaching our values at the highest level or something, by all means, like we
Sure.
understand as a people person to know how to triage and how to classify things. But if it's, judgment call here, as I said, day to day, part of that role sometimes with first time leaders or even sometimes critical talent is sitting with them to also play that role to build empathy. And if you can build empathy across the company, you have better relationships. And when you have better relationships, you have better trust. And when you have better trust, you have better engagement and performance. So that empathy piece around the business is very important. I think other soft skills as well is, influence. You can do it with data, but also again influencing and motivating people, and language that you use and timing and all of that sort of soft skill I think is also really important in terms of, I think that's a key part of their role, how to influence. And there's technical things that you can do with that, but there's also soft skills involved with that in terms of as I said, language, choice of words, style, body language, and all of those soft skills that come with building their own EQ with that as well. I mean, the list goes on in terms of soft skills. But I would say, the empathy is the number one. You have to really build on in the company. It's a highly stressful pressure cooker environment. We have ambitious goals. That is the whole
Yes.
thing of how can we not forget about the empathy piece at the same time. And to add to that as well, I have to make this very clear to people leaders that I coach and mentor sometimes too, is empathy doesn't mean that we talk in a language that the founder has to always understand, like feelings. I know this sounds quite strange. There are times when the people leader needs to be coached to understand that actually, while you're looking at the lens of employee experience and feelings, that still has to then translate into business language that the business can understand the knock-on effect of the feelings and how that translates into business impact, and speaking that language to finance or the CEO, for example. Sometimes that emotional appeal is not the right scenario to do that from an empathy perspective for the right thing for the business.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. But you're definitely in a position where you've seen a lot of companies and fill a lot of roles and be very successful. Is there a handful of things, or maybe one thing that you've seen that separates the successful companies from the ones that don't do as well?
So I've been asked this before, and I think about this a lot because I've seen very successful ARR companies with interesting leadership dynamics that have still gone on to build good products and got there in the market. And I talk about this with founders around particular stories. And I've seen really good companies with great cultures that unfortunately haven't had the product market fit, and great team but didn't have the success. And maybe that's market risk, maybe that is execution, who knows. But I do like to think, when I looked at this great company, we've gone the route to $1 billion valuation, great traction and whatnot, but interesting leadership dynamics. I think I do like to think that culture is the difference between good and great. And, I'd be interested to see more studies done on that in terms of, valuation increase and changing behaviors on culture to see the impact of that. But yeah, I do think at the end of the day, though, early on, I like this, I say this a lot, but product market fit, eats culture for breakfast, arguably. So I think like once you get past that, I'd like to think, culture and really focusing on that, and scaling culture is the differentiator.
I like that. Yeah, great culture won't save a bad product market fit. If,
Yeah,
if there's no market for the product, the
that's the
great
harsh
culture is,
reality. Yeah, exactly that.
that's great. Where can we learn more about you and about Developer online?
So yeah, we're developer spelt with an A, so developer. And we're online, developer.io, which explains a little bit about our core services. I'm also on LinkedIn, so that's Beth at developer. So you can find me on there. And I post lots of LinkedIn posts around lovely anecdotes of my fun stories from the startup world, but hopefully some useful
Yes.
learnings in there. And producing more content, as I mentioned to you offline earlier, around performance. There'll be more coming out on that in the coming weeks as well on my website.
Outstanding. We'll make sure and link all of that in the show notes, and everybody should follow you on LinkedIn. So we'll make
Oh,
sure
thank
that
you.
that's in there as well. Great content. Thanks, Beth, for being on SaaS Fuel.
Thank you so much for having me, and stay in touch.
Thanks again, Beth, for coming on the show and sharing your journey and insights. Growth requires different thinking. Definitely parallels my experience. And shifting that mindset is an absolute difference maker. You can learn more about Beth and Developer at developer.io. As always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And of course, check out our YouTube channel as well. Full episodes, crazy storm footage in this case, video shorts, training, outtakes, and lots more. Thought leaders share. Are you one? I'll bet you are. If this episode resonated with your journey of personal growth, share it with someone walking a similar path. Everyone who shares this week gets a Gale Force Game Planner. This AI-powered device automatically adjusts your business strategies based on the intensity and direction of economic and competitive winds, ensuring that you remain steady no matter what kind of storms are swirling around you. Join us Thursday on our SaaS Fuel Expert Series, where my guest is Kyle Kudarewski, Operations Manager at WebStreet. We'll be talking about finance and investing in online businesses, and specifically SaaS. And next Tuesday, we have founder Dr. Masha Petrova, founder of Nullspace. We'll talk about her founder journey and how she built 3 simulation software startups, all acquired in the last 10 years, and her current spin-off company as well. Absolutely amazing. She is incredible. So I will see you next time, and as always, no matter what happens, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/SaaSfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.